The Coming Race, Part 3, Chapter 13. This people have a religion, and whatever may be said against it, at least it has these strange peculiarities. Firstly, that they all believe in the creed they profess. Secondly, that they all practice the precepts which the creed inculcates. They unite in the worship of the one divine creator and sustainer of the universe. They believe that it is one of the properties of the all-permeating agency of Vril to transmit to the wellspring of life and intelligence every thought that a living creature can conceive. Though they do not contend that the idea of a deity is innate, yet they say that the man is the only creature, so far as their observation of nature extends, to whom the capacity of conceiving that idea is vouchsafed. They hold that this capacity is a privilege that cannot have been given in vain. Hence, prayer and thanksgiving are acceptable to the divine creator and necessary to the complete development of the human creature. They offer their devotions both in private and public. Not being considered one of their species, I was not admitted into the temple in which the public worship is rendered, but I am informed that the service is exceedingly short and unattended with any pomp of ceremony. It is a doctrine with the Vrilia that earnest devotion cannot, with benefit to itself, be maintained long at a stretch by the human mind. They believe all attempts to do so either lead to fanaticism or to hypocrisy. When they pray in private, it is when they are alone or with their young children. They say that in ancient times a great number of books were written upon speculations as to the nature of the deity, but these were found to lead to such heated and angry disputations as not only to shake the peace of the community, but in the course of discussing the attributes of the deity, his existence became argued away. For, said my host, since a finite being cannot define the infinite, he only reduces the divinity into an end like himself. During the later ages, therefore, all theological speculations have been so discouraged as to have fallen utterly into disuse. The Vrilia unite in a conviction of a future state, more felicitous and more perfect than the present. If they have very vague notions of rewards and punishments, it is perhaps because they have no such systems among themselves. There are no crimes to punish, and their moral standard is so even that no one is considered more virtuous than another. In fact, in their extraordinary mode of life, there are so few temptations to wrong that they are good merely because they live. They have some fanciful notions upon the continuance of life, even in the vegetable world, as the reader will see in the next chapter. Chapter 14. Though the Vrilia discourage speculations on the Supreme Being, they concur in a belief that solves the problem of evil. They hold that any life once given is never destroyed, but passes into new, improved forms on other planets. This living thing retains its sense of identity, connecting its past life with its future and conscious of its progressive joy. They believe this is necessary to discover the perfect justice of the all-good. Injustice, they say, can only come from a lack of wisdom, benevolence, or power. These wants are incompatible with an all-wise, all-good, and all-powerful being. They argue that the justice resulting from these attributes requires another life for every living thing, not just man. They observe that one individual in nature may be wretched compared to its neighbors, existing as prey or suffering from disease. It is an error, they say, to reply that the Supreme Being only acts by general laws. A meaner conception is to assume justice is only due to man. There is no small or great in the eyes of the divine life-giver. They grant that nothing which feels it lives and suffers can perish through the ages. All suffering here would be brief compared to eternity. If the living thing retains its sense of identity when transferred, we have a right to assume divine justice is uniform and universal. This justice flows from perfect knowledge, love, and power. However fantastic, This belief confirms their political systems, which establish equality, mildness, and tenderness. Their notion of compensation to a tortured insect may seem a wild crotchet, but it is not mischievous. It is a luminous conviction of the Creator's goodness, understanding that general laws cannot admit partial injustice. The intellectual conditions of this race harmonize great, antagonistic philosophical doctrines from the upper world. I may conclude by referencing their belief in indestructible life with a passage from the zoologist Louis Agassiz. Agassiz argues that animal relations prove a reflective mind called them into existence. This argues for an immaterial principle in every animal, similar to man's. He states that arguments for man's immortality apply to this principle in other beings. A future life without contemplation of the organic world would be a lamentable loss. He looks to a spiritual concert of all worlds and inhabitants in their Creator's presence as the highest conception of paradise. Chapter 15. Kind to me as I found all in this household, the young daughter of my host was the most considerate and thoughtful in her kindness. At her suggestion, I adopted the dress of the Vrilya, enabling me to visit the town without exciting curiosity. The city was large in proportion to its territory, which was no greater than a nobleman's estate. The whole of it was cultivated to the nicest degree, with mountain allotments left free for tamed animals. So great is their kindness that a public sum is devoted to deporting animals to other communities when they become too numerous. They do not, however, multiply like animals bred for slaughter in our world. It is an old custom to leave a neutral, uncultivated borderland between each sovereign state. In this case, the tract was a ridge of savage rocks, impassable by foot but surmounted by wings or airboats. The surplus wealth of this community was chiefly agricultural, and it was eminent for constructing farming implements. In exchange, it obtained luxury items with a high price set on birds taught to pipe artful tunes. I saw no other pet animals except some sportive batrachian creatures, resembling frogs, which the children kept. They have no animals akin to our dogs or horses, as machinery and wings have superseded their uses. The only creature they use for burden is a large goat. The nature of the rocky soil first suggested the invention of wings and airboats. The largeness of space was due to the custom of surrounding every house with a separate garden. The broad main street expanded into a vast square containing public offices and a magnificent fountain. All public edifices have a uniform character of massiveness and solidity. Along their upper stories ran a balcony or terraced garden filled with flowering plants and tame birds. In my excursions, I was never allowed to go alone. Aflin, or his daughter, was my companion. In this community, an adult guy is seen walking familiarly with any young'un. The retail shops are not numerous, attended by intelligent and courteous children. The shopkeeper himself might not be visible, as he had taken to the business from liking, independent of his fortune. Some of the richest citizens kept such shops, as no difference of rank is recognizable. An An from whom I bought sandals was the brother of the chief magistrate, and said to be twice as rich. The Ana are an indolent set after childhood, ranking repose as a chief blessing. Without incentives like cupidity or ambition, no wonder they rest quiet. In ordinary movements, they prefer feet to wings, but use wings for sports, dances, or visiting country places on lofty heights. The young prefer wings for travel to other regions. Those accustomed to flight can fly 25 to 30 miles an hour for several hours. But the Ana generally, in middle age, avoid rapid movements requiring violent exercise. Perhaps for this reason, they habitually use sweating baths, followed by douches of perfumed waters. They have great faith in the salubrious virtue of certain perfumes. It is also their custom, about 4 times a year, to use a bath charged with vril. They consider this fluid, sparingly used, a great sustainer of life. For nearly all diseases, they resort to vril as the chief assistant to nature. In their own way, they are the most luxurious of people, but all their luxuries are innocent. They dwell in an atmosphere of music and fragrance. Every room has mechanical contrivances for soft melodious sounds, which they believe has a soothing and elevating effect on character. Though temperate, they are delicate and dainty in food and beverage. In all their sports, even the old exhibit a childlike gaiety. Happiness is the end at which they aim. Regard for the happiness of each other is evinced by their exquisite amenity. Their conformation of skull has marked differences from any known races in the upper world. I never met with one person deformed or misshapen. The beauty of their countenances is in symmetry, a smoothness lasting to old age, and a serene sweetness of expression combined with majesty. This expression inspired in me a sentiment of humiliation, awe, and dread. The males are entirely beardless. The guy I sometimes, in old age, develop a small mustache. I was surprised to find their skin color was not uniform, some being much fairer with blue eyes and auburn hair. This admixture arose from intermarriage with other fairer tribes of the Vrilia. The dark red skin showed the most ancient family, but they attached no pride to it. They believed their excellence came from frequent crossing with other akin families and encouraged such intermarriages. Nations not conforming to the Vrilia's manners were regarded with disdain. I learned from Z that the Vrilia's superiority originated in the intensity of their earlier struggles against nature. There is a legend they were driven from a region denoting my world to perfect their condition through severity. They are destined to return to the upper world and supplant all inferior races. Aflin and Z often conversed with me about the upper world, which Z assumed they would one day exterminate. They found perpetual subjects of comparison between our populations and the barbarous subterranean races. They both agreed in desiring to conceal from their community any premature opening to the sunlit regions, as they shrank from annihilating millions. The pictures I drew of our life saddened them. In vain I boasted of our great men. Alas, said Z, this predominance of the few over the many is the surest sign of a savage race. She explained that happiness requires the extinction of individual strife and competition. Their notion is to assimilate life to the existence of blessed spirits, a life of serene tranquility without self-made cares or contentious passions, like avarice and ambition. Such a life is gladdened by the untrammeled interchange of gentle affections. This political state is the goal of all their theories of government, utterly opposed to the progress of uncivilized nations. The most powerful race beyond the Vrilia esteems itself the best governed, having established the Kumpash, government of the ignorant because they are the most numerous. It places supreme bliss in vying for power, wealth, and eminence. Some years ago, said Aflin, I visited this people, and their misery was appalling because they were always boasting of their felicity. He saw no hope for improvement, as their notions tend toward further deterioration. In fact, resumed Z, if wisdom is to approximate the serene equality of immortals, a system based on inequality is a direct flight in the opposite direction. Minds accustomed to such turbulence would find the happiness of gods exceedingly dull. Chapter 16. I have spoken so much of the Vril staff that my reader may expect me to describe it. This I cannot do accurately, for I was never allowed to handle it for fear of an accident caused by my ignorance. It is hollow, with several stops or springs in the handle by which its force can be altered. By one process it destroys, by another it heals. It can rend rock or disperse vapor and affect both bodies and minds. It is usually carried as a walking staff, but can be lengthened or shortened. When used, the upper part rests in the palm with the fingers protruded. Its power was not equal in all, but proportioned to the user's own vril properties. They assert that the full exercise of vril power can only be acquired by hereditary temperament. A female infant of 4 can accomplish feats which the strongest skilled mechanician from outside their race could never achieve. All wands are not equally complicated. Those for children are simpler. In the wands of wives and mothers, the destroying force is usually abstracted and the healing power fully charged. I should add that this people have invented tubes to conduct the virile fluid over distances almost indefinite, from 500 to 600 miles. Their mathematical science is so accurate that they can estimate unerringly how to reduce a vast capital to ashes in a very short time. Certainly these Ana are wonderful mechanicians. I went with my host and Z over the great public museum, which houses contrivances we pride ourselves on as recent achievements. In one department, carelessly thrown aside as obsolete lumber, are tubes for destroying life by metallic balls and powder, similar to our cannons. My host spoke of these with a smile of contempt. In another department were models of vehicles worked by steam and an air balloon. Such, said Z, were the feeble triflings of our savage forefathers, ere they had a glimmering perception of vril. This young guy was a magnificent specimen of muscular force. Her features were beautiful but stern in repose, a sternness made formidable by her ample shoulders and lofty stature. Z inspired me with profound terror. In the museum, merely by playing her vril staff from a distance, she put large, weighty substances into movement, endowing them with intelligence. She set complicated machinery into movement, and within a short time, raw materials were reproduced as perfect works of art. Whatever effect mesmerism has over nerves, she produced over lifeless mechanism. When I mentioned my astonishment, Z asked me to compare our hands. The thumb of the guy is much larger and longer than ours, and the palm is thicker and softer. More remarkable is a visible nerve in the palm, branching to the fingers. With your slight thumb and absence of this nerve, she said, you can never achieve more than feeble power over vril. This nerve has been slowly developed over generations of vril use. In 1 or 2,000 years, it might possibly be engendered in the higher beings of my race who devote themselves to this science. She corrected my notion of inert matter, explaining that no particle is motionless. Vril is the most subtle agency, and her current merely renders more potent the action eternally at work on every particle. A heap of metal, through its susceptibility to movement, can receive the thought of the intellectual agent working on it. It is animated for the time by the soul infused into it, so it can be said to live and reason. I was too much in awe of the young guy to argue. I recalled that a wise man once said there is no arguing against a reasoner who commands 10 legions. Though I had a secret persuasion that Mr. Faraday could have proven her a shallow philosopher regarding vril's causes, I had no doubt Z could have brained all the fellows of the Royal Society with one blow of her fist. Every sensible man knows it is useless to argue with an ordinary female on matters he comprehends, but to argue with a guy 7 feet high on the mysteries of vril was as futile as arguing with a simoom in a desert. Amid the various departments of the College of Sages, the one that interested me most was devoted to the archaeology of the Vrilya. This section comprised a very ancient collection of portraits. The pigments used were so durable that pictures said to be thousands of years old retained much freshness of color. In examining this collection, two things especially struck me. First, that the pictures from 6,000 to 7,000 years ago were of a much higher degree of art than any produced within the last 3,000 to 4,000 years. Second, that the portraits from the former period much more resembled our own European types of countenance. Some reminded me of Italian heads from the canvas of Titian, speaking of ambition, craft, care, or grief. These were the countenances of men who had lived in struggle and conflict before the discovery of vril. They were men who had fought with each other for power or fame, as we in the upper world fight. The type of face began to change about 1,000 years after the vril revolution. With each generation, it became more serene, and in that serenity more terribly distinct from the faces of laboring and sinful men. In proportion as the beauty of the countenance became more developed, the art of the painter became more tame and monotonous. The greatest curiosity in the collection was a set of 3 portraits belonging to the prehistorical age. According to mythical tradition, they were taken by the orders of a philosopher whose attributes were mixed up with fable, like an Indian Bud or a Greek Prometheus. From this mysterious personage, all the principal sections of the Vrilia race pretend to trace a common origin. The portraits are of the philosopher himself, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather. The philosopher is attired in a long tunic of scaly armor, perhaps borrowed from a fish or reptile. He has wonderfully long, webbed digits, little perceptible throat, a low receding forehead, bright brown prominent eyes, a wide mouth, high cheekbones, and a muddy complexion. According to tradition, this philosopher lived for many centuries. He remembered his grandfather in middle life and his great-grandfather in childhood. The portrait of the grandfather had the features of the philosopher, only much more exaggerated. He was not dressed, and the color of his body was singular. The breast and stomach were yellow, the shoulders and legs a dull bronze hue. The great-grandfather was a magnificent specimen of the batrachian genus. He was a giant frog, pure et simple. Among the sayings the philosopher bequeathed, this is recorded: "Humble yourselves, my descendants. The father of your race was a tadpole. Exalt yourselves, my descendants, for it was the same divine thought which created your father that develops itself in exalting you." Aflin told me this fable while I gazed on the 3 batrachian portraits. I replied that I presume none of his race, even in less enlightened ages, ever believed that the great-grandson of a frog became a philosopher. "Pardon me," answered Aflin. "In the wrangling or philosophical period of history, a distinguished naturalist proved to his disciples the analogical and anatomical agreements between an ant and a frog. They had some diseases in common and were subject to the same parasitical worms. The ant has a swimming bladder, no longer of use, which is a rudiment proving his descent from a frog." "I understand that," said I, "because such enormous frogs were said to be inhabitants of the upper world before the deluge. But pray, proceed." "In that age, whatever one sage asserted another was sure to contradict. Therefore, another sect of philosophers maintained that the frog was the improved development of the ant. The shape of the frog was much more symmetrical than that of the ant. The majority of the anna in that day were almost deformed and ill-shaped. Again, the frog had the power to live on land and in water, a mighty privilege, partaking of a spiritual essence denied to the ant. The earlier races of the anna seem to have been covered with hair, but the object of the higher races has been to erase all vestige of connection with hairy vertebrata. They have gradually eliminated that debasing capillary excrement by the law of sexual selection. The degree of the frog is shown in that he has no hair at all, not even on his head. He was born to that hairless perfection which the most beautiful Anna have not yet attained. The complication of a frog's nervous system was shown to be more susceptible of enjoyment than our simpler physical frame. The examination of a frog's hand accounted for its keener susceptibility to love and social life. In short, these 2 schools raged against each other. One asserted the ant was the perfected frog, the other that the frog was the highest development of the ant. The moralists were divided, but most sided with the frog preference school. They said that in moral conduct there could be no doubt of the vast superiority of the frog. All history showed the wholesale immorality of the human race, but the severest critic could not detect a single moral aberration in frog manners. What, after all, can be the profit of civilization if superiority in moral conduct be not its aim? The adherents to this theory presumed that in some remote period the frog race had been the improved development of the human. But from some cause, they had not maintained their position, while the Ana, by ferocity and cunning, acquired ascendancy. Unhappily, these disputes became involved with religious notions. The multitude took the whole question out of the hands of the philosophers. For not less than 1,000 years, war and massacre prevailed, during which philosophers on both sides were butchered. The government of the Kumpash was happily brought to an end by a family that established its descent from the aboriginal tadpole. These despots finally disappeared as the discovery of vril led to our tranquil institutions. And do no wranglers now exist to revive the dispute? I asked. Do they all recognize the origin of your race in the tadpole? Nay, said Z with a lofty smile. Such disputes belong to the pabode of the Dark Ages, and now only amuse infants. When we know the elements out of which our bodies are composed, can it signify which form the All-Wise combined them in? The N commenced to exist as N with the donation of the capacity to receive the idea of the Creator. With that capacity, he has the sense to acknowledge that his race can never combine the elements into the form of a tadpole again. You speak well, Z, said Aflin. It is enough for us to feel assured that whether the An's origin was a tadpole or not, he is no more likely to become one again than our institutions are likely to relapse into the strife rot of a kumpash. Chapter 17. The Vrilya, having no sight of heavenly bodies, do not arrive at their divisions of time as we do. I found it easy to compute their time with my watch. I reserve details of their time rotation for a future work. Their year differs very slightly from ours in duration, but its divisions are not the same. Their day consists of 20 of our hours instead of 24. Their year comprises a correspondent increase in the number of days. They subdivide their 20-hour day thus: 8 silent hours for repose, 8 earnest time for occupations, and 4 easy time for festivities and recreation. Out of doors there is no night, as they maintain the same degree of light at all hours. Within doors, they lower it to a soft twilight during the silent hours. They have a great horror of perfect darkness. On festive occasions, they continue full light, but keep note of time by mechanical contrivances like our clocks. These chronometers strike the principal divisions of time with music. At every hour, the sounds from all the timepieces have an effect singularly sweet and solemn. During the silent hours, these sounds are subdued. They have no change of seasons, and the atmosphere is equable, like an Italian summer. Time is the same for sowing or reaping. At the same moment, you see younger plants in blade and older plants in fruit. All fruit-bearing plants, after fruitage, shed or change their leaves. What interested me most was ascertaining the average duration of life amongst them. I found their life considerably exceeded our own. What 70 years are to us, 100 years are to them. Few among them die before the age of 100. They enjoy a general health and vigor which makes life a blessing to the last. Various causes contribute to this: the absence of alcohol, temperance in food, and a serenity of mind undisturbed by anxious passions. They are not tormented by avarice or ambition. They are capable of great affection, but their love shows itself in tender complacence. As the guide chooses her own mate, she is lenient to his faults and consults his humors. The death of a beloved one is a cause of sorrow. but the survivor takes consolation in the certainty of reunion. All these causes concur for their longevity, though much is owing to hereditary organization. Their records show lives were shorter in their earlier, more competitive societies. They say duration of life has increased since their discovery of real's invigorating properties. They have few professional medical practitioners, and these are chiefly Gai. They have diversions and assemble during the easy time for winged sports. They also have public halls for music and theaters. The plays resemble Chinese dramas, thrown back into distant times and violating all unities. These plays are of ancient composition and their stories cast in remote times. They seemed dull to me, but were relieved by mechanical contrivances and broad humor. The audience, chiefly Gai, appeared to enjoy them greatly. I observed all the performers were under adolescence. The mothers and sisters came to please their children and brothers. No new plays or important imaginative works appear to have been composed for generations. New publications are chiefly devoted to mechanical science and practical matters. Sometimes a child writes a tale or a young guy a poem, but these are of little merit. The most interesting literary works are those of explorations into other nether regions. I expressed surprise that a community with such scientific progress had no contemporaneous literature. My host replied that such literature would be incompatible with their social fealty. They have a government with which they are content, allowing no differences of rank. There is no stimulus for individual ambition, so no one writes works advocating change. If an N is dissatisfied, he does not attack the system, he goes away. Thus, literature relating to speculative theories on society is extinct. Formerly, much was written about the attributes of the divine being and arguments about a future state. Now they all recognize two facts. There is a divine being, and there is a future state. They agree that no amount of writing could throw light on that future state or quicken their apprehension of the divine being's essence. Thus, another part of literature has become extinct, happily for our race. In times when so much was written on undeterminable subjects, people lived in a state of perpetual quarrel. So too, a vast part of ancient literature consists of historical records of wars and revolutions. You see our serene mode of life now. We have no events to chronicle. What more can be said than that? They were born, they were happy, they died. Coming next to poetry, the reasons for its decline are obvious. The great masterpieces portray passions we no longer experience: ambition, vengeance, unhallowed love. The old poets lived in an atmosphere of these passions and felt them vividly. No one can express such passions now, for no one can feel them. Again, the old poetry dissected the mysteries of human character, leading to vice or extraordinary virtue. Our society, having got rid of temptations, has rendered the moral average so equal there are no salient virtues. Without strong passions or heroic excellences, poetry is reduced to a meager diet. There is still the poetry of description, of rocks, trees, and common life. Our young Gi weave this insipid kind of composition into their love verses. Such poetry, said I, might be made charming. We have critics who consider it higher than that which depicts the crimes of man. Possibly, he replied, but I suppose the writers take great pains with their language. They devote themselves to the polish of words as an art. Certainly they do. Though the gift of poetry may be inborn, it requires as much care as a block of metal needs to be made into an engine. And doubtless your poets have some incentive to bestow all those pains. Well, their instinct makes them sing, but to cultivate the song probably needs an inducement. They find it in the love of fame, or sometimes in the want of money. Precisely so. But in our society, we attach fame to nothing a man performs in his life. Preeminent praise would confer preeminent power, awakening evil passions like envy and hate. Our history tells us that most famed poets were also assailed by vituperation and rendered unhappy. As for the stimulus of want, no man in our community knows poverty. Furthermore, almost every occupation would be more lucrative than writing. Our public libraries contain all the preserved books of the past, which are infinitely better than any new ones. We are not such fools as to pay for reading inferior books when we can read superior ones for nothing. With us, I said, novelty has an attraction. A new book, if bad, is read when an old book is neglected. Novelty, to barbarous states struggling for something better, has an attraction denied to us. But as a great author said, he who studies old books will always find something new. Lacking the stimulus of fame or want, those with the poetic temperament vent it in song, but for lack of culture, it fails of an audience and dies out. But how is it, I asked, that these discouragements do not operate against science? Your question amazes me. The motive to science is the love of truth apart from fame. Science is devoted to practical uses, essential to our social conservation and daily comforts. No fame is asked by the inventor or given to him. He enjoys a congenial occupation needing no wear of the passions. Continuous exercise is best for the mind. Our most ingenious scientists are, as a rule, the longest lived. Painting is an amusement to many, but the art is not what it was when painters vied for a golden crown. You observed in our museum how superior the pictures were thousands of years ago. Music, being allied to science, nourishes the most amongst us. But even in music, the absence of fame prevents great superiority. We excel in choral music with mechanical instruments rather than in single performers. We have had scarcely any original composer for some ages. Our favorite airs are ancient, but have admitted complicated variations by inferior musicians. Are there no political societies, I asked, animated by those passions, where poetry still improves? There are such societies in remote regions, but we do not admit them within the pale of civilization. They are savages living in that low stage of being, kumpash, tending to dissolution. Their existence is passed in perpetual contest. When they don't fight neighbors, they fight among themselves over frivolous points, unintelligible to us. They pretend to be all equals, but the more they remove old distinctions, the more glaring the disparity becomes between the many who have nothing and the few who have much. The many always hate the few, but cannot live without them. Sometimes they exterminate the few, but a new few always starts out of the many, harder to deal with. In short, they are savages groping in the dark. They would demand commiseration if they did not provoke destruction by their arrogance. Can you imagine, he said, that such creatures have threatened a tribe of the Vrilya because they have 30 millions of population, and the Vrilya tribe has 50,000? But 30 millions are formidable odds against 50,000, I exclaimed. My host stared at me, astonished. Stranger, said he, you could not have heard me say this tribe belongs to the Vrilya. It only waits for war to commission some half a dozen small children to sweep away their whole population. At these words, I felt a thrill of horror, remembering my praise for American institutions, which Aflin called kumpash. Recovering, I asked if there were modes of transit by which I could safely visit these remote people. You can travel with safety by Vril agency throughout the range of our allied communities. But I cannot vouch for your safety in barbarous nations governed by different laws. These nations are so benighted that many live by stealing from each other. One could not safely leave their own door open even during the silent hours. Here our conversation was interrupted by the entrance of Tay. He came to inform us that he had been deputed to discover and destroy the enormous reptile I had seen on my arrival. He had begun to suspect my eyes had deceived me, or the creature had escaped to the wild regions, but it had given evidence of its whereabouts by devastating the herbage bordering a lake. And, said Tay, I feel sure it is now hiding within that lake. I thought it might amuse you to accompany me to see how we destroy such unpleasant visitors. As I looked at the young child's face and remembered the creature's enormous size, I felt a shudder of fear for him and for myself, but my curiosity to witness Vrill's power prevailed. I also did not wish to lower myself in the eyes of an infant by betraying personal fear. Accordingly, I thanked Tay for his courteous consideration and professed my willingness to set out. Please stay tuned for part 4 of the coming race. Peace, blessings, much love and enlightenment to you all. Shalom.